The copy machine jammed again on a Tuesday, which is how I ended up alone in the back office at Voss and Hargrove long past 7, digging paper out of the feeder with a letter opener, while my phone buzzed against the counter for the 4th time in 10 minutes. I already knew who it was. "Where are you?" the first text had said. Then, "You said 7. Then, seriously, Lee?" I set my phone face down and went back to the copy machine. "My name is Lee Calloway, and I'd been working as a contract coordinator at Voss and Hargrove International Shipping for 3 years. 3 years of 60-hour weeks and supply chain spreadsheets, and learning to navigate the particular geography of a company that moved legitimate cargo, electronics, pharmaceuticals, industrial equipment, across 14 countries. 3 years of understanding, slowly, through accumulated small observations I never let myself examine too closely, that the man who signed my paychecks operated in spaces where legitimacy was a matter of paperwork rather than practice. Mr. Hargrove handled the legal work, the accounting, the public face. Dante Voss handled everything else. I'd met him on my second day, when he'd walked through the open plan office without looking at anyone, and then paused in front of my desk as though he'd forgotten something, turned, and studied me for a moment with gray eyes that gave nothing away. "You're the new contract coordinator," he said. Not a question. "Yes, sir." He nodded once and kept walking. That had been 3 years ago. Since then he'd spoken maybe 40 words to me directly, all of them professional, all of them precise. But I'd felt his attention in the way a room feels a shift in barometric pressure, present and invisible at the same time. My phone buzzed again. "Come on. I'm waiting at the restaurant." "You're embarrassing me." Brendan had made the reservation 2 weeks ago. Told me it was a work dinner with potential clients, that I needed to wear something nicer than what I usually wore, that I should be there at 7 sharp, because first impressions mattered, and my tardiness was a habit we really need to address. The fact that he'd never mentioned what firm these clients were with, or what I was supposed to contribute to the dinner, or why I specifically needed to be present. I'd learned not to ask those questions. You learn that over time. You learn which questions are safe. I finally got the paper jam cleared at 7:14. I was collecting my things when the door at the end of the hall opened and Dante Voss appeared. Jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbows, looking at a document in his hand that he clearly found either fascinating or deeply irritating. He looked up, stopped. "Calloway." He never used first names. "You're still here." Copy machine was jammed. I got it. He glanced at the machine, then back at me. I was suddenly very aware that my hands weren't quite steady and that my coat was half on, half off, and that I'd been holding my breath for the last 30 seconds. "Everything all right?" he asked. It was such a simple question. 4 words. But something in the way he said it, level, unhurried, like he actually intended to wait for a real answer, made my throat tighten unexpectedly. "Fine," I said. "Long day." His eyes stayed on mine for a beat longer than necessary. "Then you should go home, Lee." He'd never used my first name before. I wasn't sure he even knew it. I almost didn't recognize it coming out of his mouth, and in the 3 seconds it took me to register what he'd said, he'd already turned back toward his office. "If you ever need anything," he said, not turning around, "you call me, day or night. You have my number." I did have his number. He'd given it to me 18 months ago when I was coordinating a shipment that required 3 a.m. authorization signatures, and I'd saved it in my phone under D. Voss. Work, and I had never once considered using it for anything other than shipping documentation. I left without responding, took the elevator down to the parking garage with my coat, still half on, and my mind running calculations I didn't want to finish. Brendan was on his 3rd drink when I got to the restaurant. I could tell by the particular angle of his shoulders, the way his smile landed a half-second late. The clients, 2 men in suits who I later learned were not clients at all but acquaintances, Brendan was trying to impress. Made it through appetizers before the evening began its familiar slide. He didn't say anything in front of them. He was good at that, saving it. He waited until we were in the parking lot. 45 minutes, he said. "I told you 7 o'clock, Lee. I told you specifically. The copy machine jammed. I texted you. You texted me at 7:20, when you were already 20 minutes late. Brendan, I was at work. You were with him." He said it quietly, which was always worse than when he said things loudly. "You think I don't know what goes on in that office? You stay late 3-4 nights a week. You work for a man who has dinner with people the FBI watches, and you come home smelling like his building. The accusation was so specific and so wrong simultaneously that I couldn't figure out where to start refuting it. I didn't smell like Dante Voss's building. I smelled like toner and old coffee, which was the smell of my own desk, the same desk I'd sat at for 3 years. And the FBI comment was, I didn't know where that came from, or if it was even true, or if Brendan had just said it to see how I'd react. You're imagining things, I said. Don't do that. His hand closed around my wrist, not hard, not yet, but with intention. Don't make me feel crazy. You've been pulling away for months, and I want to know why. I wasn't pulling away. I was standing in a parking lot at 8:30 on a Tuesday night explaining a copy machine. But I said none of that, because I'd learned the calculus of these conversations too. The longer they ran, the worse the interest charged. We drove home without speaking. Brendan made himself another drink in the kitchen while I changed in the bedroom, and tried to quiet the noise in my chest that I'd started calling the permanent alarm, the low-grade hum that had moved in sometime in the last 2 years, and never quite left. I lay in the dark next to a man I'd moved in with, because he'd said it made sense financially, and because I'd been 27 and lonely, and he'd seemed, at the time, like someone who saw me. I thought about Dante Voss saying my name. I thought about how strange it had felt. How strange that the only time all day I hadn't been braced for impact was those 40 words in the back hallway of a shipping company at 7 in the evening. I fell asleep eventually. I don't remember deciding to. The incident happened on a Friday. I'd stayed late to finalize a contract amendment. Genuinely late, necessary late, documented in the system with timestamps, and I was locking my desk when my phone rang with Brendan's ringtone. You're not home, he said. I told you this morning I'd be late. The Meridian contract. It's almost 8. I know what time it is. There was a pause that I had learned to read the way meteorologists read pressure gradients. Then, is Voss there? I don't know where Mr. Voss is. You don't know. You've been there for 3 years and you don't know where your boss is. He's not I work for the company. He's not. Brendan, I'm coming home. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't bother, he said, and hung up. I should have called someone else. My sister in Portland. My friend Kim, who'd been gently suggesting for months that Brendan seemed a lot to handle. I should have called anyone. Instead, I sat in the parking garage for 4 minutes, engine running, staring at the concrete pillar in front of my car, and then I drove home because I didn't know what else to do. He'd been drinking since 6. I could measure the night in empty bottles, lined up on the kitchen windowsill like evidence he was unconsciously collecting. It started with the question. It escalated through the familiar checkpoints. My phone, my location history, a text from Kim that he'd read over my shoulder and interpreted as something I couldn't follow. And then it reached a place it had never reached before. His hand connected with the side of my face. The sound was very loud in a very quiet apartment. We both stood there. I had my hand against my cheek. He had his arm still half extended, and I watched him arrive at the reality of what he'd just done. Saw it move across his face like weather, horror, following shock, following something I might once have mistaken for remorse. Lee, he said. God, I didn't. I'm not. Get out, I said. My voice came out very flat, very level, like it belonged to someone who'd prepared for this, which part of me had. Please let me. Get out of my apartment right now, or I'm calling the police. This is my name on the lease, Brendan. Get out. He grabbed his keys, said something on the way out the door about how we'd talk when I was calmer, about how we needed to think about what came next, about how he loved me. The door closed. I locked it, turned around, slid down the wall, and sat on the floor of my own kitchen in my work clothes with my cheek throbbing and the permanent alarm screaming at full volume. My phone was in my hand. I scrolled past Kim, past my sister, past my mother, who had met Brendan twice and said nothing but had looked at him with the particular expression she usually reserved for whether she expected to turn. I stopped on D. Voss, work. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for my legs to go half numb against the tile, long enough to talk myself into it, talk myself back out of it, and then make the call before I could talk myself out of it again. It rang twice. Calloway. His voice was alert immediately. No grogginess, no confusion, like he'd been awake and waiting for something to require his attention. I'm sorry to call this late, I said, and my voice broke on the 4th word, which I hadn't planned for. A pause. Very short. What happened? I wasn't going to tell him. I'd called to ask. I didn't know what I'd called to ask. Maybe just to hear a voice that didn't currently frighten me. But the question landed with such uncomplicated directness. No performance, no bracing. No, are you sure you're not overreacting? I need someone to come get me, I said. I don't have anyone I can call right now, and I know this isn't. This is your personal number, and I shouldn't be. What's your address? Not a question. Just words in a sequence that meant he was already moving. I gave it to him. He told me to lock every door, to not open anything until he said his name. He stayed on the phone, and I heard him moving, heard a door, heard an engine. Tell me what happened, he said, and his voice had shifted into something quiet and controlled that I associated with the way he sounded when a shipment went wrong at 2 a.m., and he needed the situation managed immediately and correctly. We had a fight. My boyfriend, he hit me and I made him leave. He might come back. Silence. Then a quality of silence I'd never heard from him before, which was entirely different from the usual kind. I'll be there in 12 minutes, he said. Don't open the door. He was there in 10. He said his name, and I opened the door. And he stood in the hallway in dark jeans and a gray t-shirt, with his hair like he'd been running his hands through it. And behind him was a man named Garrett, I learned later, who was watching the corridor with the particular stillness of someone paid to be very good at watching corridors. Dante's eyes went to my cheek first. Something moved across his face, brief, controlled, gone before I could fully read it. Grab what you need for a few days, he said quietly. You're not staying here tonight. I wanted to argue. I had a lease. I had a perfectly functional apartment with Brendan's name removed from it after a negotiation 6 months ago that he'd characterized as unnecessary, and I'd characterized as basic security. But standing in my doorway at 9:30, with a handprint blooming on my face, I had no argument that reached him. I packed a bag in 7 minutes. He carried it without asking. His car was a dark SUV with leather interior, and a driver named Croft, who navigated Chicago traffic with the focused serenity of someone who treated red lights as suggestions. Dante sat beside me in the back and catalogued the bruise on my face, with eyes that gave nothing away except the set of his jaw. Where are we going? I asked. Somewhere with security. That's not an address. No, he agreed. It's not. He had a building on the north side, not a penthouse in the way you see in movies, but the top 3 floors of a converted warehouse, all exposed brick and industrial windows, and the particular kind of quiet that comes from very good soundproofing and security glass. A woman named Rosario met us at the elevator. Housekeeper, I gathered, from the way she took my bag and pointed me toward a room at the end of a long hall without needing to be told anything. The room was larger than my living room. The sheets looked like something from a hotel that required a review before you could make a reservation. My doctor is on call, Dante said from the doorway. I'd like her to take a look at you. I'm fine. I'd still like her to. Is she actually a doctor? She trained at Northwestern. I'll let her tell you the rest. She arrived in under 30 minutes, a woman in her late 40s named Dr. Vasquez, who had the hands of someone who'd been doing this for decades and the expression of someone who'd seen this particular kind of bruise before and had stopped reacting to it visibly out of professional mercy. No fracture, she said, gentle fingers pressing along my cheekbone. You'll want ice tonight and heat tomorrow. The wrist. She examined where I'd braced against the wall without realizing I'd done it. Same treatment. Come see me if the swelling increases. After she left, I stood in the shower for a long time, longer than I'd stood in a shower in years. I stood there until the water ran cool, and then I stood there a little more and tried to remember when I had last felt like my own body was a safe place to be inside. Dante was at the windows when I came out, looking at the city with a glass in his hand. He'd changed into dark pants and a lighter shirt, and he looked human was the word that came to mind. Which was not how he looked at the office, where he looked like a problem that had learned to wear a suit. There's food if you want it, he said. Rosario left things in the kitchen. I'm not hungry, okay? I moved to stand near the window, not next to him but in the same direction. Chicago was very bright at night. I'd lived here for 9 years and I still found that startling sometimes, how much light a city could make against a dark sky. How long? Dante asked. I didn't pretend not to understand. 2 years with the hitting. Longer with everything else. How much longer? I don't know, it builds. It doesn't happen all at once. It's like water, kind of. It gets in through very small cracks, and then one day you look around and you're just wet everywhere and you don't remember being dry. He was quiet for a moment. You don't have to go back. I know. I did know that. The knowing and the doing, I'd discovered, were two different logistical problems. The apartment is mine. He left tonight because I made him. But there are things. My car is technically in his name. We had a shared account he drained before I closed it 6 months ago. I stopped. There were other things. Things I hadn't wanted to look at yet. There's more, Dante said. Not a question. I don't know yet, and I didn't. But there was a feeling I'd had for the last 2 weeks, a cold water feeling every time I looked at my credit card statement, that something was wrong in a way I hadn't fully measured yet. Rest, he said. Tomorrow there will be time to look at everything. Tonight you don't have to solve anything. I nodded, moved toward the hall, stopped. Why did you give me your number? I asked. 18 months ago. The Meridian authorization call. You could have just had dispatch reach you. He turned from the window. In the dim light, his gray eyes were darker, unreadable. Because I wanted you to be able to reach me directly, he'd said, if you ever needed to. I didn't ask what he meant. I went to bed and slept deeper than I had in 2 years, which I didn't expect, and which told me something about my nervous system. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. I found out about the credit cards on a Sunday. I had my laptop on my knees and a cup of coffee going cold beside me, and I was doing what I always do when I need to feel in control of a situation. I was making a list. Assets, liabilities, accounts, timelines. The efficient part of my brain that managed shipping contracts for a living was applying itself to the problem of my own financial life and finding things I did not expect to find. 3 credit cards I had not opened. A personal loan for $19,000 I had not applied for. A second loan, smaller, 60 days past due. My social security number, my date of birth, my employment information, which Brendan had access to because he'd helped me file taxes 2 years ago when my accountant was dealing with a family emergency, and I'd been grateful. I sat there for a long time, looking at the numbers, feeling something that started as cold and became, very slowly, the cleanest and most clarifying anger I had ever experienced in my life. Then I called Dante. He answered on the first ring. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I haven't told you what's wrong yet. Your voice told me, he said. 20 minutes. He was there in 18. I showed him everything. The accounts, the loans, the credit inquiry history showing applications made on dates when I'd been at work and Brendan had been. Where? At home. With access to my filing cabinet, my desk drawer, the folder where I kept the documents you keep because you need them for taxes and healthcare and proving you exist. Dante looked at the screen. Then he looked at me. We call the police, he said. Tonight. He'll say I authorized it. Did you? Of course not. Then we prove that. Identity theft and fraud leave paper trails. Lee. Credit applications have IP addresses. Loan documents have signature analysis. This is prosecutable. He has a lawyer. His uncle is a... I have 4 lawyers, Dante said, with a flatness in his voice that I could have laughed at if I weren't about to cry. And none of them are related to Brendan Walsh. I looked at my screen. $32,000 in fraudulent debt. My name. My credit. Built up over 14 months of sleeping beside someone I'd trusted with the location of my important documents. I want to be the one who does this, I said. Not. I appreciate everything I do, but I need to be the one who reports it, who gathers the evidence, who walks into that police station. He looked at me for a long moment. Then I'll make sure you have everything you need to do it. The detective's name was Alvarez, and she had the particular exhaustion of someone who'd been doing financial crimes, work for 15 years, and still cared more than was professionally sustainable. She sat across from me at a table in the 18th District Station and went through my documentation with the quiet attention of someone reading a very sad book they already knew the ending to. He was methodical, she said finally. Yes. The loans were opened over 14 months. He spread it out so no single inquiry would trigger a fraud alert. I know. You built a strong preliminary case. She closed the folder. I won't sugarcoat this. He'll likely claim you authorized everything, that you're fabricating this after the relationship ended. His attorney will argue motivation. I know that too. I'd spent 3 weeks preparing for this conversation. 3 weeks of pulling together bank statements and credit bureau dispute letters, and a handwriting analyst's preliminary review of the loan signatures. Not her, the analyst had said, without qualification, and a timeline document that I'd rebuilt with the same methodology I used for shipping audits. Brendan had been thorough. I had been more thorough. "I'll recommend charges," Detective Alvarez said. "Identity theft, fraud, forgery, multiple counts. This goes to the state's attorney within the next 2 weeks." I nodded. My hands were completely still. "One more thing," she said. "The assault. You filed initially, then withdrew the statement." "I refiled it," I said. 2 days after I withdrew it, with photos." She raised an eyebrow. "Dr. Vasquez provided timestamp documentation," I said. "I have copies." She almost smiled. "Ms. Calloway, you should consider a career in this office." Dante was waiting in the lobby. He read my face the way he read everything. Quickly, accurately, without asking me to explain. His expression shifted by approximately 2 millimeters in the direction of something warmer. "It's done," I said. "They're moving forward." "He didn't say I told you. He didn't say I knew you could do it. He said, 'There's a Thai place 2 blocks from here that's actually good,' and held the door open, and that was somehow exactly right." We ate at a corner table and talked about something other than Brendan for the first time since I'd shown up in his guest room 3 weeks ago. He told me about a shipping route that had been nightmarish in the late 90s before infrastructure caught up. I told him about a contract error I'd caught in my first month that had saved the company $300,000 and that no one had acknowledged because the alternative was admitting it had existed. He looked at me across the table. "I knew about that. You never said anything." "I didn't think you wanted me to. You'd fixed it quietly. I respected that." I looked at him for a moment. "You're very strange to work for." His mouth curved. It was, I realized, the first time I'd seen him do that. Actually smile, not the controlled professional acknowledgement he used in meetings, but an actual expression of genuine amusement. "I've been told," he said. That night, back at his building, I stood in the guest room, looking out at the city and thought about Brendan. Not with grief, exactly. I'd been grieving for months while we were still together, grieving the version of him I'd believed in before I understood what he was. The grief of the present was clean by comparison. Smaller. I thought about how long I'd been making myself small, how many questions I hadn't asked, how many nights I'd swallowed whatever I wanted to say because the alternative was the silence that came after. I thought about Dante in the hallway of the office 3 years ago. The 40 words over 3 years. The number in my phone I'd never called. I knocked on the door of his study at 10:30, which was probably inappropriate, and he said, "Come in," which was probably something. He was at his desk with paperwork that looked like it had opinions about him. He looked up. He waited. "I've been looking at apartments," I said. "In Wicker Park. I found a 1-bedroom, good building, reasonable commute." Something moved behind his eyes, carefully neutral. "Okay, I need to move out, not because." I stopped, started over. "It's not about you or about this not feasleif. It's about me needing to know that I can build something that is entirely mine. Does that make sense?" "Yes." No hesitation. "When?" "After the arraignment. I want to see his face when he's charged before I do anything else." Dante set down his pen. "I'll help with the move. Movers, truck, whatever you need. I can. I know you can," he said. "I'm offering because I want to, not because I think you're incapable. You can tell me to stay out of it and I will." I looked at him. This man who had sent a car for me without asking, who had not once suggested I was overreacting, who had sat on the other side of a Thai restaurant table and told me, obliquely, that he'd been paying attention for 3 years. "Why?" I asked. The same question I'd asked before, but bigger now. He was quiet for long enough that I thought he might not answer. Then, "Because I have been watching you work for 3 years, and I have never once seen you treated the way you deserve to be treated. Not by Walsh, not by anyone. And when you called me," he stopped, adjusted something in his expression. "You didn't have to call me. That you did matters to me." More than you've said," I repeated. "You haven't said anything." "No," he agreed. "Because you're still healing. Because anything I feel is not something you need to deal with right now. And because I'm not Brendan Walsh. I don't intend to make my needs your emergency." I sat down in the chair across from his desk without being invited, which felt significant. "What if I want to know?" I said. What if that's actually the thing I want right now? To know that there's something real somewhere, that it's not all just. It's real, Dante said quietly. It has been real for a long time. Then, say the rest of it. He looked at me with those gray eyes that had catalogued me 3 years ago in a 2-second pause outside my desk. I'll say the rest of it when you're standing in your own apartment, in your own life, choosing to be somewhere instead of recovering from somewhere else. I'll say all of it then. I'll say it as many times as you want. I went back to my room. I lay in the dark. I thought about the word choosing and how long it had been since I'd applied it to myself without irony. The arraignment was on a Wednesday in November gray sky, cold that had purpose to it. I sat in the gallery and watched Brendan Walsh stand before a judge, in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and hear the charges read. 5 counts of identity theft, 3 counts of fraud, 2 counts of forgery. His lawyer, the uncle I'd heard, was not actually involved. The uncle apparently wanted distance, entered a not guilty plea and asked for release on personal recognizance. The judge set bail at $40,000. Brendan looked at me once across the courtroom. I looked back. He looked away first. Outside, the cold hit my face and felt like something I'd needed. I signed the lease on the Wicker Park apartment that afternoon. I moved in on a Saturday in December. Movers Dante had hired, who treated my furniture like it was made of something fragile and expensive, which it mostly wasn't. The apartment had hardwood floors and a bay window that looked out onto a maple tree and a kitchen, where I could reach everything without moving my feet, which is my private metric for a kitchen I can live in. Rosario had, without my knowledge or consent, stocked my refrigerator. I found this out when I opened it at 9 that night and discovered it contained coffee, eggs, a full vegetable crisper, 3 kinds of cheese, and a note in handwriting I didn't recognize that said, "Good luck, Miss Calloway. You've earned it." I sat on my kitchen floor, my tile, my lease, and cried for about 5 minutes. Happy crying, I think. The kind that's really just relief finishing a very long job. I texted Dante. Someone stocked my refrigerator. A pause. Then, "You're welcome." The trial was in March. I testified for 2.5 hours. Brendan's attorney tried 4 different approaches to making me seem like someone motivated by revenge, by instability, by whatever they could make stick. None of it stuck. The handwriting analyst was unequivocal. The IP records placed every fraudulent application at the apartment, on dates I was demonstrably at work with timestamps in the Voss and Hargrove system. I had built a case the way I built shipping audits, which is to say without gaps. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Brendan's expression, when the verdict came in, was the expression of someone who had genuinely believed his own story. That's the thing about people like him. They're so convinced of their own narrative that reality landing is actually a surprise. I felt nothing I'd expected to feel. No triumph, no particular satisfaction, just the quiet of something finally finished. Dante was outside on the courthouse steps, hands in his coat pockets, the city moving around him in the particular way cities move in March. Uncertain, not yet warm, trying. "Done?" he asked. "Done," I said. He looked at me. A long, assessing look, the same kind he'd used the first day I met him, except now I knew what it meant. Not assessment for threat, not calculation, but the careful looking of someone who wanted to see all of what was there. "I had something I was going to wait to say," he said. "I know. You told me to say it when you were standing in your own life." "I'm standing in it," I said. "Right now. This is me, standing in it." A muscle moved in his jaw. Lay. Just my name, and somehow that was most of it. "I've been in love with you," he said, "since you fixed the Meridian contract error in your first month and didn't say a word about it to anyone. Since you went 3 straight weeks during the Bellport negotiations working until 9 o'clock, and always said goodnight to the cleaning staff by name. Since you answered the phone when I called you at 3 a.m. for a signature authorization, and managed to sound professional and awake when I know you'd been asleep." He stopped. "That's 4 years of watching someone and knowing they belonged somewhere better than where they were and not saying anything because it wasn't my place. And then you called me and I said. "And I am still not going to pretend I'm uncomplicated," he said. "What I do, the way I operate, there are parts of my world that aren't." "I know what you do," I said. "I've worked for your company for 4 years. I'm a contract coordinator. I am very good at reading between lines. And I'm still here," I said. On these steps, choosing to be, he crossed the distance between us, his hands coming up to frame my face, with the kind of careful deliberateness that made it clear he'd been thinking about this for a long time and intended to get it right. "Then I'm choosing you back," he said. "Every day. For as long as you'll have it." He kissed me on the courthouse steps in March in Chicago, with the city making its noise around us, and it felt like something beginning. Not the tentative beginning of something fragile, but the beginning that comes after you've already done the hard part, after you've already stood in your own fire and come out standing. What I know now, that I didn't know 2 years ago, is that love isn't the feeling you get when someone pays attention to you. I'd mistaken Brendan's surveillance for attention, his control for care, his jealousy for evidence that I mattered. What I know now is the difference. Dante doesn't check my location. He asks where I'm going because he's interested in where I'm going. He doesn't screen my calls. He hands me his phone if I need it and walks out of the room. He doesn't tell me my painting is a waste of time. I started again, watercolors, a class on Tuesday evenings, and he has a piece I gave him in his study where he can see it from his desk. He is not uncomplicated. There are evenings when I don't hear from him and I know, from the silence and the quality of his voice when he does call, that something in his world has required managing. I chose this. I chose it the way you choose anything real, with full knowledge of what it costs, and the decision that the cost is worth it. My credit is recovering. The fraudulent accounts were removed following the verdict, the debts declared invalid, Brendan's conviction creating the paper trail that demolished every claim he'd authorized. My credit score went up 40 points in February, and I felt genuinely delighted in a way that probably seemed small from the outside, and felt enormous from where I was standing. I got promoted in April, Senior Operations Director. Dante announced it in a staff meeting, with the same flat professional efficiency he applies to all decisions, and did not look at me any differently than he looked at anyone else in the room, which is how I know he's actually fair about these things. I'd earned it. He just said so in front of people. My apartment in Wicker Park has a maple tree outside the bay window that went completely yellow in October, and which I painted 3 times trying to get the color right. The third version is close. My sister visited in June and met Dante over dinner, and afterward texted me, "Okay, I get it," which is, for my sister, essentially an extended oration. Last Thursday, Dante came by the apartment after a late meeting. He does that now, and found me on the couch with a book and the particular tired contentment that comes from a week you've actually survived rather than endured. He sat beside me, didn't say anything. After a while, he said, "You look like yourself." "I feel like myself," I said. He picked up my hand, looked at it, put it back down but kept holding it. "Good," he said. "Keep doing that." Outside, the city did what Chicago does in November, which is insist on itself through cold and early dark, and still manage to be, somehow, beautiful. I looked at the window, at the maple tree, bare now, at my own reflection, faint in the glass, woman in her 30s with a book and a life she'd built from the rubble of one she'd outgrown. I looked like someone who had chosen. I looked like someone who would keep choosing. That was enough. That was, it turned out, everything.